This is Alex Yu, and you are watching the very first episode of the Ragin Ronin review. Cue music. Okay, I don't have an intro song. I know it's a little bit late, but I'm going to review Iron Man 2. I just saw it last weekend, and it blew me away. Literally. No, but seriously, it was a really good movie. Of course, it wasn't as good as the original, because originals are usually better. Unless you're a movie like Star Wars, everybody can agree that Empire Strikes Back was better than Star Wars. Because Darth Vader revealed that, Luke, I am your father. Join me, and we'll rule the galaxy as father and son. No! Anyways, I'm not gonna go a whole lot into the story, so let's just get down to the nitty gritty. Everyone is back with a handful of new characters. You know how everybody says that the special effects in Transformers was the robots? In Iron Man 2, Robert Downey Jr. is the special effect. There's something about Robert Downey Jr. as Tony Stark which makes him so much more interesting than Bruce Wayne or Peter Parker. I think it is his charisma or his whole attitude as this billionaire. I don't think anybody else can play Robert Downey Jr. better than Tony Stark. You know what I mean. Gwyneth Paltrow, no complaints. Jon Favreau has an even bigger role as Happy Hogan, who is Tony Stark's assistant. We actually explore Happy Hogan's character a lot more in the second movie. Scarlett Johansson. Although the Russian accent is gone, she still plays Black Widow really awesome. And she kicks some serious ass. Jackie Chan style. I mean, Bruce Lee style. Okay, Samuel Jackson as Nick Fury. I have some things to say about that. It's more along the lines of the same things I had to say about him playing Mace Windu, because I really didn't see Nick Fury or Mace Windu. All I saw was Jules Winfield in Pulp Fiction. I was surprised that they didn't have a scene about a foot massage. Sam Rockwell and Mickey Rourke were perfectly casted. And finally, Don Cheadle. If I were to compare Don Cheadle and Terrence Howard, I'd have to go with Terrence Howard. But the thing is that Don Cheadle actually had more screen time as War Machine than he did as Colonel Rhodes. So nobody could play War Machine better than Don Cheadle, because Terrence Howard was actually Colonel Rhodes more. You know what I'm saying? Okay, well, anyways, what I'm trying to say is they're equally as good. Don Cheadle gets my thumbs up. Visual effects, absolutely top notch. In fact, I think ILM is at the very top of their game. The CG effects were even better than the first one, and even better than the effects in Transformers Revenge of the Fallen, which had the effects also done by ILM. Even in Revenge of the Fallen, the effects for Devastator did seem a little bit cartoony. It still wasn't as convincing as I thought it would be. In Iron Man 2, you don't have to worry about that. Everything looked absolutely photorealistic, thus making the action scenes way more believable, and ILM has really raised the bar. The action is definitely bigger in Iron Man 2. There was more explosions! Boom! Boom! Bow! In the first Iron Man, many people mentioned that it was the story and the character development that made the movie way more interesting. It wasn't so much about the action that made it entertaining, it was the story. I'm gonna have to agree with that. I felt the first half of Iron Man had the best scenes because it actually shows you how Tony Stark becomes Iron Man. So for part 2, considering that our protagonist has been fully developed, the writers decided to go for the more visual approach and bombard us with more action. And boy, did they really deliver. And a lot of fanboys are going to be very pleased. I gave the first Iron Man a 9.5 out of 10. Some might think that's kind of high, but if you look in Rotten Tomatoes, it does get a similar kind of rating. So now I give Iron Man an 8 out of 10, which is also very close to what Rotten Tomatoes gave it, because they gave it 77%. So let's talk about why a superhero sequel is usually much harder to make better than the first. In most cases, directors will go for the Michael Bay route, and that is to make things bigger and louder than the first one. Jon Favreau did do that. However, he developed the story a little bit more, just enough to keep the audiences intrigued. One of the biggest challenges in storytelling in a sequel is how do you tell a story that is more interesting or equally as interesting as the origin story. The origin stories in Batman Begins, Spider-Man, and Iron Man had some of the greatest moments because it answered a lot of questions about where did stuff come from. For example, where did the Batcave come from? Where did the Batmobile come from? Where did he get all his armor? So in the sequel, all that stuff is thrown out the door because they took care of that aspect in the first movie. So how exactly do you make the story better? The only way is to give the character further new developments and also include a badass new villain. Example, Spider-Man 2, in my opinion, is better than Spider-Man 1 because they developed Peter Parker's character even more with his feelings of guilt about the death of his uncle. And they also introduced Dr. Octopus as the main villain. Another example is that X2 is better than X-Men. Not only do we learn more history about the origins of Wolverine, but we're introduced to Nightcrawler, who unfortunately was a little bit underused, but we still got to see him kick ass. And The Dark Knight goes without saying as being much better than Batman Begins. Batman Begins is still really good, but Dark Knight definitely tops them all. And that is because the storytellers brought in more emotion and introducing a classic fan favorite villain. To be completely honest, I was losing a little bit of interest throughout the halfway point of the movie because they were introducing so many new story elements into the movie that it started getting a little bit convoluted. But by the end of the second act, it kicks back into gear when there's a new development about Tony Stark's character. Another reason why I gave Iron Man 2 a lower mark than the first one was because although the climactic battle was exciting, it still left me wanting more. It ended kind of abruptly, and we all know that the ending is the final impression it's going to leave on the audience because it's the last thing we remember about the movie. Although it was really exciting, it still made me feel like in the end it'll affect the viewer's overall score of the movie. Okay, now let's talk comic books. One thing I love about Jon Favreau as a director is that, like you and me, he's also a fanboy. Throughout the movie, you will notice, or you might not notice, that there are a lot of subtle references to other comic book characters and stories. What it is that they're setting it up for the upcoming Avengers movie in 2012. The Avengers is a Marvel team that is made up of Incredible Hulk, Iron Man, Thor, Captain America. Eventually, all these characters' movies are going to come out. We already saw Incredible Hulk, we saw 2 Iron Man movies. Next year, we're getting Captain America and Thor. I think that is really cool that the writers are putting something together which will allow all these movies to come together as one. Incredible Hulk and Iron Man are in a semi-reality-based world. Thor and Captain America is more fantasy-based. It's going to be a challenge on how they're going to make it work, considering that all these different movies are being told through the eyes of individual directors and writers. But somehow they're going to make it work. I have faith in them. Okay, let's really talk about this. Iron Man can really happen. It's kind of plausible like Batman, because Iron Man wasn't zapped with some radiation or he didn't drink a super serum. He just is a rich guy with a lot of resources. Hulk is a little bit far-fetched because he drank a super serum, but it's a protein shake that makes you 100 times more explosive, I don't know, and whenever he gets angry he turns green and big. Totally plausible. Now Captain America stretches it a bit because you bring his character from the 50s to present day using the Austin Powers method, and that is being frozen in a block of ice. An archaic form of cryostasis, if you will. But what really is bending your disbelief is Thor, the god of thunder, from a fantasy world. So how do you incorporate that into the world of Tony Stark? Well, they're gonna make it happen. I'm just a tad bit worried, but more excited than I am worried. Speaking of which, Jon Favreau did mention that he wanted Mandarin as the villain for Iron Man 3. The rest of the story will depend on how everything is fleshed out in Thor, Captain America, and the Avengers. While we're on the subject of comic books, we're going to talk about the Demon in the Bottle storyline. From what I understand, the Demon in the Bottle story is not going to be fleshed out in all of Iron Man 1, 2, and 3. It's a great story, but we kind of saw a smaller version of itself in Iron Man 2. For those that don't know, the Demon in the Bottle story deals with Tony Stark and his alcoholism issues. So eventually, he's just too drunk to take care of his duties, so therefore Colonel Rhodes becomes War Machine and he takes care of all the duties that Iron Man's supposed to take care of. He eventually loves the power that he's given with the suit, and his actions become a bit questionable and unethical. When Tony Stark sobers up, they do a bit of battle, and it's just epic. Now, we got treated to a little bit of this in Iron Man 2, and I'm glad that Jon Favreau did decide to incorporate a little bit of this story in, because it also shows to the fans that he's loyal to the original stories. Now let's talk box office. Iron Man is going into its 3rd weekend, and on its first weekend it made $128 million. I'm going to predict that this movie is going to end up at $392 million. That's right. So why would I predict that number? Spider-Man sits at $403 million. Transformers Revenge of the Fallen sits at $402 million. Keep in mind this is at the domestic box office. Iron Man 2 is no Spider-Man, but it's definitely better than Transformers Revenge of the Fallen. So why would I predict that and make less than Transformers Revenge of the Fallen? Well, I believe that the Iron Man following is huge, but it's just not as big as the Hasbro franchise. Anyways, the bottom line is that it's a fun movie. It still lacks the heart of the first one, but still has some really great moments. And these moments are dictated by amazing visual effects. A solid 8 out of 10. To give you a better idea of how I score comic book movies, check out my past ratings. Be sure to check out my next upcoming webisodes as we talk more about movies and just have a geeky old time. This review has been brought to you by UrbanSamuraiHobbies.com. Be sure to check them out. They're doing the pre-orders for the Hot Toys Iron Man Mark IV action figure as well as War Machine. Click the links in the underbar. Don't you miss out on this one. So what did you think of Iron Man 2? Post any of your thoughts or a short review and a rating out of 10 in the comment section below. So what movie do you think I should review next? Let me know. I'm Alex Yu, and this has been a Ragin Ronin review. Peace!